Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if Japan never annexed Korea. By winning the Russo-Japanese War, Japan's path on becoming a dominant power in East Asia seemed almost unstoppable. Japan could be an important great power of that time and focus on new projects. Japan had its eyes on Korea, China and then the rest of East and Southeast Asia. Most notably seen with the idea of the co-prosperity sphere during World War II. In many cases, Japan had to occupy certain portions of lands in order to form a pro-Japanese government in certain territories. Korea was a different case. Korea got annexed without war, actually. Just after winning against Russia, Japan tried to influence Korea and actually demanded Korea to make certain reforms. Why did Japan pressure Korea to do that? Well, in the Treaty of Portsmouth, the one that was signed after the Russo-Japanese War, Russia acknowledged Japan's paramount political, military and economic interest in Korea. And as such, Japan saw Korea as nothing more than a mere protectorate. Korea still had certain chances to not accept Japan as their overlord. And certain measures were taken, especially by the Korean Emperor in 1907. Emperor Gojong secretly sent 3 representatives to bring the problems of Korea to the world's attention. He sent them to Den Haag. The 3 envoys were refused to access to the public debates by the international delegates who questioned the legality of the Protectorate Convention. Out of despair, one of the Korean representatives, Yi Chun, committed suicide at The Hague. The reaction to this was that Japan tried to push the reforms even further and that in 1910, Japan formally annexed Korea. But what if all of that changed? What if Japan never annexed Korea? Some people might argue that one would have to go as far as in the end 1890, or that one would need to change the outcome of the Russo-Japanese War. While I understand why these points are mentioned, and they actually seem very understandable, I would think that there are other ways to go around. Let's say that in 1907 Emperor Gojong might have had some success and that the world would pay attention to the situation of Korea. The UK would probably not be that open to support Korea. The same would go for France, who already had Indochina, while the Netherlands would be too busy with Indonesia. This would leave us with another empire, the German Empire. The German Empire had some special zones of interest in China already. Several Germans were actually important within the Korean Empire. I will name you someone like, for instance, Franz Eckert, who composed the Korean national anthem, Richard Wunsch, who was the personal physician of the Korean Emperor Gojong, and then we also have Antoinette Sontag, who was in charge of the palace household affairs. Germany would not certainly see Korea on an equal foot, let's be honest in here, but be happy to have relations with them and exploit the fact that only Japan would try to influence Korea so far. And since Japan would be closer to the UK and later on also to the US, Germany probably wouldn't mind helping Korea out, but for their own advantage. In fact, they could help Korea not only a little bit, but really a lot. If we compare Korea and Japan, for instance, for that matter also China, Korea has resources, which Japan is lacking, and Korea could stay united. Well, unlike China, who was in the midst of a civil war. Will Korea now immediately become a superpower? Hell no, that's impossible. In there we would have to go as far as the other proposed dates. No, Korea will still be the weaker country compared to Japan and even China. Korea will get German support and have more assistance from Germany. What would happen during World War I? Well, for one, Korea would certainly not be dragged in the conflict, as there was no reason for Korea to join. On the other side, after World War I, Korea may be subject to the influence of other European countries, like the UK for instance, who would be too afraid that the Soviets might suddenly influence other countries around them and that communism might spread even until Korea, for instance. Korea could even serve as a country that would grant asylum to White Russians, for instance, and White Russians, they could build a counter-movement against the Bolsheviks. Japan will nonetheless constantly push for more influence in Korea, but the UK, perhaps even France and the US, would be against it. They might argue that a Japanese annexation of Korea could only add fuel to the Korean communists, and that keeping an independent Korea would be vital for the stability of East Asia and to contain the spread of communism. An independent Korea could intervene on behalf of some Chinese factions and support them in one way or another. And I actually believe that the nationalists, they would get the support of an independent Korea, but only if they were open to actually relinquish certain claims that they had on Korea and around certain territories. This won't put them at odds with the Soviets, because Stalin actually favored the nationalists and he did not like Mao Zedong. And in some weird way, even without being communists, the Koreans could enjoy pretty constant and even good relations with the Soviets. At one point the Koreans would have a conflict with the Japanese, but the Koreans could be in a very good spot. They could first of all defend their coasts, they would have potential allies, and the Japanese allies, if Japan will still join the Axis, were too far away to do anything about it. I'm not saying that the Japanese will be beaten, but I think that the Japanese would be dealt with way easier and they would deal less damage than in OTL. It is possible that Nazi Germany may be even beaten way quicker than in OTL if the US still joins the war, for instance. Or British and Soviet efforts might actually be more than enough to beat the Nazis, because the Japanese, they would be too busy with the Koreans and Chinese only. The really interesting part will be the post-World War II period. Japan might become something like Franco-Spain in terms of political relations. Japan would not give up on their military dictatorship and probably remain an aggressive and non-moderate country. Their economy may not rise that much as it did in OTL, because there would not really be this total destruction of nuclear bombs. And the society would still remain very traditionalist, and I think that only a few more modern aspects they would actually win some foothold within the Japanese society. Only if the US could intervene in one way or another and convince the Japanese that communism is bad, Japan could first of all become like a secret ally to the US and later on more openly support the US. Korea will be a wild card in such a scenario. Why? Well, relations with Mao are off the table. While relations with the Soviet Union, they could be very good and even grow as there would be the Sino-Soviet split, Korea would still be seen as a capitalistic monarchy, of course. However, the Realpolitik, they would dictate the Soviets to keep Korea around, just in case, With Mao as Chinese ruler and an unpredictable, unreformed Japan as ally to the US, the Soviets, they would use every means possible to keep Korea on their side, or at least somewhat neutral. This Korea won't be similar at all to North Korea. In fact, it will be more similar to South Korea, with only this little twist in a different approach towards the foreign policies. With the fall of the Soviet Union and probably also a fall of the military dictatorship in Japan, Korea and Japan, they could have less issues to approach one or another. as Korea was never annexed by Japan, thus the crimes that happened in OTL, they, well, never happened at all in this alternate timeline. In OTL, both countries are kept by the US on the same side, while in this alternate timeline, both countries would ally each other more willingly, seeing China as the new potential threat. Thus, we could still see US troops in Korea and especially in Japan, but also then again to a lesser extent, and probably would see more Japanese troops, as the Japanese, well, they would never have abolished their own military. And that's where we leave it for now. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.